So in the context of us, the two of us having a chat together, we both advise professional services firms, specifically in and around financial advice, as well as a lot of them cross over into the accounting field.
Yeah.
So we've both got a whole lot of experience in helping businesses to be better than where they're at now. And I guess the idea behind this conversation was to say, hey, what can a business owner or someone who aspires to be a business owner in the advice space, what should they be thinking about in 2019? What's some of the keys to moving forward? And I guess, what's the framework that everyone's operating in? The other thing that I think is interesting about the two of us having a conversation is that we both have run for significant periods of time advice firms ourselves. So yeah, we help other businesses, but we've also run those businesses ourselves. And so you get to have a different perspective of experience when you're operating on both sides of that coin as well. So we might just, for the people in my audience and certainly for your audience, we might just get you to give, a 30-second or maybe slightly longer brief overview of what your history is and what you've been doing.
Yeah, okay, thanks, Baz. So I've had 4 or 5 advice businesses. The current one, Horizons Wealth, has been, it's our 10th anniversary this year actually, so we're pretty pleased about that. We not only run an advice business with a couple of partners that also coach, so the coaching comes out of a really deep well of experience and current experience. But we also have a back office business in Sri Lanka, so I've got about 40 people over there doing paraplanning and back office work, as well as the coaching business Praxis. And I might just sort of, Praxis is a Greek word, and it actually means practice as opposed to theory, so it's all about implementation. And although we can present well and people get enjoy the presenting work and the workshops that we do, but it doesn't really matter unless people implement. So I say that we're not there to tickle people's ears. We're there to help them make better, and principally advice businesses, but also crossing over into financial planning and mortgage broking. What would you reckon your sort of main type of business improvement work would be, Baz?
Well, I might just reciprocate first and give a brief background. So I started my own professional service advice firm, which was fee for service holistic advice, in 1997. I was 23 years of age, and I built that business up over a 15-year period. At one point it had more than 20 staff within the business, and I sold that business in December 2010, and had a couple of years transition period, etc. And the reason for that was I found more of my fulfillment was coming from helping the advisors that I was working with rather than from that business itself. So still maintained that passion, but I kind of felt like I'd done everything that I wanted to do and in running that business itself, and I needed to go out and do something else. And so where I've moved to now is the social advisor, and it's been a very interesting journey over the last 7 years in particular. And I think one of the interesting things is you raised a really good point, and that is I'm not really interested in getting a client and having them pay me and then not having them actually take some action and get tangible results. And I think that's one of the interesting challenges when you move into being in the coaching, consulting, advisory space for business, is that it's very, at least unless you really understand the human aspects of it and you have a very good structure, it's very challenging to actually create change. And at the end of the day, change always comes down to the business owner. And you and I have had this conversation, numerous times before. So when it comes to what kind of things I focus on, it's predominantly around the communication. So communication internally as well as externally. What's the value proposition? How are you charging? How are you articulating? How are you building your personal brand? How are you attracting clients? How are you creating leverage through your communication? What are your main obstacles, both personally and business-wise, and where are the breakthrough for those? And it's been interesting working with you over the last couple of years because we both work on very similar things, we've reached very similar conclusions, but we both tend to focus on slightly different aspects of helping those advice businesses become something better. And I mean, at the end of the day, I'd be very happy if all of my clients were your clients and vice versa, because it would ultimately create the best result. But one of the challenges is, of course, timing and focus. So I think when it comes down to advice businesses, one of the interesting things that I've learnt, and I'm going to throw this topic open as one of our first things to discuss, is that most advisors don't actually get advice. Right? So they deliver a service, and let's say you're talking about an accountant that's doing business advisory. So all day long they're wanting to deliver business advice to their clients. Or if it's a financial advice business, you know, fundamentally it's about advising, you know, their individual clients. And yet, of all of the businesses that I've encountered and worked with, typically the ones that deliver advice are the ones that are least likely to engage advisors professionally, which is, it's kind of an ironic consideration, isn't it? Is that something that you've encountered as well?
Yes. So I coached a number of accounting businesses and have been a little dismayed at the way in which they've run their own businesses, and sort of get a bit concerned about how they're then going to deliver business advisory services. But we sort of get on top of that, get their own business running right first, and then, you know, they're actually coaching and advising other businesses from a position of strength. Financial advice businesses, I think, you know, for people that are giving advice, there are very few that actually seek advice. And that's sort of, you can tell those, and you can really see those businesses that are going to go ahead because they're humble enough to learn and smart enough to actually pick the eyes out of what other people are doing. But for most of them, it's then about translating that into implementation. I think lots of advice businesses will have piecemeal ideas that they've tried to implement, and what they really struggle with is having a structure and a sequence to make the implementation possible. And I guess here's a question which I think is pretty important, is I tend to look for shot wonders, so quick fixes. But I know that when I start coaching a business, I'll always say to them, look, this is going to take you at least 2 years to get meaningful change in your business. You know, change will happen from day one, but to get it to anywhere near where you might, you know, think you want it to be, it's going to be a couple of years. And so I only sort of coach businesses for a year at a time, but most of my clients will come back, you know, 80% of them will come back from year 1 to year 2 and year 2 to year 3. So I think, you know, taking a long view and building the base of the business before they go for growth is super, super, super important. And that's probably where our thinking is complementary. I'm probably more about structure and process and getting things organised. Yes, we do cover, you know, the communication piece, but not at the level, you know, the depth that you cover it. And that's probably sort of the main differences, I'd suggest, between what we do.
Yeah, and so I think that's really interesting, and I guess part of that is our respective, you know, strengths, experiences, and natures as well. I like working with businesses that I call it on the verge. So in some sense, they need to have an ability to have the basics sorted. I mean, the basics of running a business, structure, HR, etc. Now, yes, I'm very happy to coach people around that, but I don't go into the same level of detail and systemize the process like you do with the businesses that you work with. And that's equally important as it is, creating the message, coming up with strategy to grow the business, etc. They both have to happen if you want to get to where you really ultimately want to be as a business owner. And I think that's one of the benefits of having an understanding of how an advice business operates itself from the inside as well.
Yeah.
So what are the greatest challenges that you find, if I were to say, hey, look, pick your top 2 greatest challenges, and I don't know why 2, that's just what I came up with on the spot. The top 2 challenges that you find advice businesses face that stop them from moving forward.
Yep.
If you had to pick 2.
Yep. So the first one, straight off the bat, is demonstration of value. Most advisors give great advice, but they're not good at demonstrating the value, and they'll have ideas in their head about what the value is, but don't have the thinking, the systems, the processes, the conversations to make sure that value gets demonstrated every time to every client. So that's number one. Second thing, I think most advice businesses have been captured by compliance, and so compliance is super important, but it becomes for them the thing that they focus on rather than the way in which they need to communicate with the client. So building a strong back end, strong systems and processes with the compliance built into it is what then frees them up to have the relationships, have the conversations with the clients, which then frees them up to demonstrate the value. So they're the 2 big things. And if I could add one more, I'll always pinch one more, Baz.
Go ahead.
Is actually the focus of the leaders. So leaders in the businesses can get so engrossed in actually, working in the business, they don't develop their own leadership and, don't create the time to work on the business and the focus to work on the business. And that's a big part of what we do as well. So, so the 3 is demonstration of value, turning the back end around so that it doesn't focus on compliance but gets the compliance done. And then the third thing is the focus and the leadership of the leaders in the businesses. What about for you, Baz? What do you think? What are the 2 big issues that you see?
Well,
you can only have 2. I've had 3, but
well, I'd have to say that it was probably a bad call me asking you the question first. I have to agree with all 3 of those. What I'm going to try and do is maybe go a little more fundamental then, because I think you've hit the nail on the head. I definitely see that all the time. Even the best firms that I find, I look at it and I go, well, how are you articulating your value to the client?
Yep.
And I'm just going to dwell on that answer that you gave for a second, because I think it's very, very topical and important at the moment as well, because there's a lot of conversation around, especially the financial advice side of things in Australia at the moment, following the Royal Commission and all of that.
Yep.
And that is that they really it's almost like the real value of advice is how you're helping a client to see themselves, make better decisions. I'm just an advisor just like I've always been, even though I don't have a financial advice business. I'm still doing the same things. I'm just not giving product advice, and I'm doing it for other business owners. And the value is the same, and that is, who are you, where are you going, what do you want really, and how are you in your own way? And that's what advisors do, whether they're accountants or financial advisors or mortgage brokers. All of the good ones are helping people to make decisions around that. And the interesting thing is that very, very few of them, i.e. almost none, actually articulate well that value. And they think that people won't pay for it. In reality, people will absolutely pay for that.
Yep.
It's just about making what's implied value explicit.
Yep.
And I think it's a real challenge. And so, yes, I definitely agree with that. And instead of charging for the product or the technical advice and giving away the real advice for free, I think what needs to happen is almost a reversing.
Yep.
So commoditizing the product component, almost giving that away, or or more simply put, making it a completely compliant, process-driven engine, and then charging for all of the other things.
Yep. And one of the things around the value that you and I have spoken about a lot is actually having the client articulate the value. So when they've had, they've just sort of come to a realisation, is particularly at the end of each meeting, is getting them to actually say, what did you get out of this? What's the biggest value that you got out of this, or the biggest insight that you've got from it? And once you've done that, you're actually getting the client, not your view of what the value is. You can show them all the numbers and have the life values-based conversations and that sort of thing. But what becomes really important is what's the value they got out of it, and then getting them to express that, and potentially even videoing it. But that's super important. So
yeah, it's really interesting, because having done this many times myself, and also having helped many businesses go through the same process of building this in as part of their systems, none of the clients will say, well, I got X return, or I saved X amount of tax, or you helped, none of them say that. They all talk about the real changes in their life and how they're feeling and what the difference is in that feeling. And so it's a really important process to us, because the value of advice and bringing that value together is very much about making the implicit explicit.
Yep.
And I think, or the intangible tangible. And a lot of advisors make that mistake of they're trying to make their value tangible, and so they're concentrating on the things that seem tangible, like the investment performance or the tax difference, or how much time they spent, or the billable hours, or whatever it may be. And so what I'm going to do is then bring that together and say, the number one challenge that I see faced by professional services, advisors, in whatever, whatever their chosen field is, whether it's lawyers or accountants or mortgage brokers or financial advisors, because it's all the same. The biggest challenge I see is their own perception of their value.
Yep.
And so it's very similar to what you've said. I just see that as being the root cause of what that primary issue is.
So you made a comment before they get in the way of themselves. Is that sort of connected to what you're saying there?
Yeah, absolutely. That's absolutely what I'm getting at.
Yeah.
I mean, by the way, this isn't something that advisors face. It's something we all face on our journey of self-awareness and life. But it's a real challenge, because what is the value that someone in professional services brings? It's them. And so it's not like you can obfuscate the proposition by giving it something else. You can certainly try, and I think that's what a lot of advisors do. They try through, one of the modules we run, I have 2 slides, and this one's specifically using financial advice as the example, and on one slide it's got monthly reviews, and it gets more extreme as I go, all the way down to, at the end of that, unlimited feet or foot massages, right? And so it's kind of like, let's throw in as much as we can to prove the value. And on the other slide, it's, well, here's what we help you change in your life, and our job is to be out of your way, hold your hand when you need it, and your job is to be there when we need to work with you and to honour that. And over the course of our time together, that will make all of the difference, because you'll know where you're going, you'll know why, and you'll have someone to help you be accountable and make smart choices. Which service offering is more compelling? Well, for 99% of decent, clients of the financial advice firm, it's the second proposition. And we get so hung up on it. I think that's a big obstacle. But the reason for that at the fundamental is believing your own value, and that you as a person bring more to the table than the investments or whatever else.
Yep.
It's you having the conversation. We all have roadblocks, we all have confusion, we all have a lack of clarity and headspace, and it's very hard, in my experience, to see that for yourself. So the reason that advisors exist is to help people see themselves and to make decisions that are actually in alignment with who they are, and to make smart choices. And the irony is, of course, that, you know, the plumber with leaky pipes, most advice businesses don't get help to see themselves objectively, and therefore their own misconceptions become the embedded limitation of the business itself.
Yeah, I thought you were going to launch into a tennis analogy there. We were a couple of very talented tennis players that don't have coaches, don't have help, and you can see how they're floundering. And if you don't have the, you know, the help around you and the infrastructure to free the advisor up, because they're, you know, the business owner advisor are the people with the greatest experience. They're the rainmakers. They're the ones that have got the life experience. If you don't have the systems, the processes, the people behind you to actually do the delivery, then you're never free, you know, as an advisor, to actually step into that place where you're actually using all that experience, that fabulous experience. And so this is the building the base piece that we've spoken about, where build the base so that you can actually be free as an advisor to advise, to advise at a high level with the right sort of clients, being confident that the delivery is going to happen. Because I think what happens is, well, I know that what happens is when advisors aren't confident that the delivery will happen, they actually stop seeing new clients. They stop selling their advice because they're not confident that it's going to be delivered, and so they don't want to be embarrassed by that. And so you get this sort of situation where advisors actually, I don't know, they self-immolate, they stop themselves from actually succeeding because they're not confident that the delivery is going to happen. And so they don't continue to get the advising experience and to get better and better and better at it. Yeah, so just going back and building the base, getting compliance on rails out of the way, all the product stuff and all the stuff that you have to do to run that sort of business happening quickly and easily and without friction, so that advisors can advise, is exactly what this is about, having those deeper conversations.
I think that's actually a good take on what you help advice businesses do. It's put the structure around them so that the advisor can actually be out there giving the advice. And if I were to then say what I concentrate on doing, it's helping the advisor overcome their own mental roadblocks, articulate themselves, and make it easy to scale their businesses. And look, we both help businesses at different stages, but it's really just about what their priorities are and what needs doing. So Phil, that was a really interesting point that you made, and what I'm going to do now is kind of come backwards and give you my second, so I won't go for three, I'll stick to my two. So the first major problem that I see is advisors not understanding their own value. And honestly, if I were to say the root challenge that all humans face is always stems back to self-worth issues. But the second biggest issue that I see is advisors not getting the right help. And I think, and if I were to look at these two precursors and then say, what does that lead to as the symptomatic major problems? It's exactly the three that you mentioned. So how do you work on those three? One, you have to understand your own clarity and who you are. And that's a very big thing that I work on with businesses. Who are you? What are you doing? What really fulfills you? Before you can build a brand or have a message or even decide on a business, you've got to know who you are. And you've got to understand where your own biases are in the way. And the second thing is, you've got to ask for help and you've got to get help. And unless you engage other advisors professionally, how can you seriously say that you actually believe in what you do? Like, it's not a chicken and an egg scenario. This is part of that causality trigger. If you're not engaging someone else, even at the beginning of a business, when, you know, cash flow is difficult and whatever, then how are you getting past that? Because how do you believe in what you do if you then don't follow that same philosophy? And I think
Baz, I just thought I might share some of my experience with you on that, because, you know, I came to you a couple of years ago and said, look, I need a bit of help. I've heard you speak a couple of times. Haven't always agreed with everything you've said, but I recognise your wisdom and recognise the things that you have in your life, and saw the goodness in your heart to want to help people. And so I embarked upon one of Baz's courses. It was a course to actually get really clear about what gave me joy. I was in a situation where I had way too much going on and was beginning to drown a bit, actually, you know, psychologically and emotionally and physically. But actually doing that gave me a massive amount of clarity. And, you know, I've run 3 businesses, as I've spoken about, and have pivoted all of those businesses so that I'm doing the stuff that is adding value to the teams in the businesses, the leaders in those businesses, but also to the clients. And that's because I got that clarity from Baz. I reached out, got some help, and although I am a coach, I recognised that I needed to be coached in that season in my life. And so that was really, really important for me, and for not only me, but for the people that I lead, for the clients of those businesses. And I think, yeah, you're right, and I think we're both right in that advisors need to be open to being advised, to being coached, or else they become, I actually think, not credible as advisors, because they don't grow. They're advising from the same well that they were advising from 5 years, 10 years ago. And that has to change. That has to change, or else, and I think those advisors that do pick that up and run with it are those that are going to be the really fabulous businesses of the future. So just a personal thanks for what you put into my life. Thank you.
Oh, a pleasure. And I have to say that, I mean, you're leading by example right there, because, you know, what we're talking about is you can't see yourself in isolation, and that's one of the reasons why having a great advisor is so valuable. It's why financial advisors and accountants and, you know, all of these people are so important to society. But the same thing you deliver to your clients, you need to get help with yourself, and if you're not doing that, you're not working in synergy. And your leadership here is great, because you run a financial advice business, you run other businesses, and you yourself are a coach, yet you still sought me out and have been coached by me. And I mean, I just want to admit,
and others, Baz, not just you.
Absolutely. And I just want to say here that you know, over the time we've got to know each other, that started to go round full circle. So now I'm coming to you, and you're giving me back that same benefit, and I'm very grateful for that. And in my own life, you know, I have people that I need to talk to make admissions to get help, to be able to see myself. And I think that's really a very strong precursor. And I guess I want to just take that one step further, because I've worked with lots of great businesses. And the ones that have been on a very successful trajectory, if I were to look at it and say, what's the number one highest correlating feature with firms that have, you know, made the best progression over periods of time? I'd have to say it's the ones that are open to and engage others for assistance. You know, if I work with a business like that, they've typically had multiple coaches, or maybe they still already do. And I think that's really, really interesting. If I could go back in time in my own business career to when I first started my firm, you know, the first 10 years I didn't go about doing that. And I certainly achieved more in the last 5 years of running my financial advice and professional services firm than I did in the previous 10. And a large part of that is absolutely because I learnt the lesson to ask for help and to pay for it.
Maybe one of the things that we could just talk a little bit about is the environment at the moment, and you know, people's approach to how the environment is playing out for them. And I think what I'm seeing is a fair bit of sitting on hands, waiting to see what happens, fear. And yes, there are things that can come out of left field, but I think when you sit on your hands and don't continue to grow yourself, grow your business, you're not doing the right thing for your team, you're not doing the right thing for your clients, and you're certainly not doing the right thing for yourself. And just share a bit of an analogy with you. One of the things that I do, call me crazy, is I fly aeroplanes without motors. I fly gliders. So you get launched behind a tug, about 2,000 feet, you'll be left on your own in the glider trying to find what's going on in the atmosphere. And I think where we're at the moment is there's what I would call unstable air. There's air going up and air going down. There's legislation changing and favouring certain sorts of approaches to advice and funds management and that sort of thing. But back to the gliding analogy. So what you're trying to do as a glider pilot is find the rising air and circle in that and avoid the sinking air. And so what you're doing is you're actually, using your experience, your wisdom to say, there is rising air over there, that's where I'm going to be. And I think in the businesses that we're running at the moment, it's an unstable environment. There's no doubt about that. But I'm backing myself and the businesses that I coach, and I'm sure Baz would be doing the same, to find the rising air, because the demand and supply of need for advice and advisors will certainly favour those that are looking for the rising air, that have an attitude, a mindset of this is a great time to actually get going and really accelerate my business, because there is a greater demand for advice than ever, but there'll be less advisors actually able to provide it. What do you reckon, Baz? Are we on the same train there?
Yeah, so it's interesting, and I guess we're speaking more specifically about the financial advice space. Accounting and law are other two professions, and mortgage brokering are some other professions I work with as well.
Yep.
And they're all experiencing very similar things for completely different reasons. So
Yep.
in Australia, mortgage broking is going through some major changes because there's been a major credit restriction, and it's not interest rates, it's the banks not lending and the process they're going through. In accounting, there's been a major change with the compliance being commoditized through software and
Yep.
and them needing to redefine what the value they bring is. And law in many ways is getting crunched in a whole lot of different ways, and that will continue to grow. Technology is going to have a massive impact on that. But if we look at financial advice, and so what I'm doing here is just giving some context for the people in my audience from all of those. So yeah, we can use the financial advice space specifically as the analogy for this, because what we've seen is a major change. And I'm speaking to lots of advisors at the moment. Even over my break, I was holding a few hands because people are a little bit confused. Well, not a little bit, they're a lot confused. Education requirements changing, dealer groups issuing, standards of compliance that make no commercial sense. People having their proper authorities removed for things
Yep.
that, in an audit 2 years ago would have just been a minor note. And so there's a whole lot of confusion. And I think what I would say is that there's one thing that remains constant, and that there's always change, right? Everything evolves, even though the principles remain the same. And so what I'm seeing in the financial advice space is absolutely a constriction. There's been so many businesses, you and I are both very connected in the Australian financial advice space, and for that reason we get to have our ears to the ground. A lot of businesses are looking to get out, and at the same
Yep.
time, valuations may be affected by that. Certainly for anything that isn't, purely fee and value generated, anything that's commission driven or whatever, is obviously having a valuation effect right now. But this stuff happens, and what I would say is, if you get caught up in other people's ideas and philosophies, and at this point in time it's the press, the banks, in some ways the licensees, and certainly the regulators, then it limits you from actually seeing the opportunity that's in front of you. And I absolutely agree with you that there is a massive opportunity, and that opportunity is growing. But advisors are going to need to transition themselves. They're going to need to do what we spoke about before, which is move from, hey, a lot of our value is tied up in being able to deliver investments and tax structuring and, you know, financial services, essentially, and more into the, well, who are you? What do you really want? And me asking you that question and pushing you and challenging you is actually where the value is. And knowing how to articulate that and charge for it. And if you can do that while you systematize the business that delivers the background, which is the investments and, you know, the technical aspects, then the opportunities are almost unlimited. And the need for that advice absolutely is going up. And at this point in time, and probably for the next 5 years, there's really a limiting of who's able to provide that service.
That's exactly right.
So I agree with you.
So let's look for the rising air.
And the rising air is, you know, it's significant. And the view up there is pretty good, I imagine. I haven't got to go out with you gliding yet, but I'm looking forward to that opportunity.
We'll do some loops.
Maybe we'll just start off with looking for rising air first. So a lot of people are coming into 2019, especially in financial advice, you know, looking at it going, what am I doing? You know, they've come off hopefully a decent break. So, you know, we've talked about the need to get advice. Now, obviously, we both provide different forms of service to advice businesses in a very, you know, I guess, mutually beneficial way. But we're not the only advisors. There's other great advisors out there, right? So the point that we're making isn't, hey, please come and see us. It's, you've got to get help and you've got to do it objectively, and you can't stop moving forward. And sometimes the easiest way to do that is by actually having someone there with you to help you go through that process.
It's one of the things that I just say to people is, stick your 2 fingers under your chin and look up, and you know, that's what a coach will help you do, is see the opportunities and then how to get them, rather than seeing, we're not dumb to the challenges. We you know, run businesses that are faced with those same challenges, but perhaps we just have a slightly different mindset about how to deal with them. So this is what we do: stick your fingers under your chin and look up.
Look, there's certainly enough to look up for. I think it's exciting, and you know, maybe people just brand me as an eternal optimist, but I say this every year, I don't think it's ever been a better time to be an advisor. And I think the more complicated things get, the simpler you can make them if you choose to. But if you let your own fear and the opinions of others get in the way, it blinds you from being able to do that. So that would be my perspective. Find your clarity, decide who you really are. You can build an advice business however you choose it to be, and people will pay you for it if you understand and believe in your own value. And I guess the next thing is make sure that you're getting the right help to do that. That's really important. So I'm going to bring this all together and say, look, again, we've had a chance to have a quick chat, talk about some of the key issues that advisors are facing, especially financial advisors in the Australian community. Now's a great time. And if you're stuck, and if you can't see it, if you've lost your mojo, you're uncertain, if you feel that you're on the right track but you just are not sure, if you just want a second opinion, then I think what we'd like to do is, and I know we had a chat about this before we decided to come on and do this video, was I'd like to take the time to say, hey, look, my diary's pretty good for the next couple of weeks, and I want to open up some time to you, and Phil's agreed to do the same. Now, obviously we can't do that for everyone all day long, but we both agreed to make ourselves available for an hour chat. If you're a business owner and you operate in an advice and professional services, then if you want a chance to sit down with someone who understands your business back to front and is willing to help you take a look at where you're at objectively and to make some suggestions to you, then take us up on that offer. I mean, normally we'd be charging for that time because my intention is not to sell something, it's to actually say, hey, where are you at? What are you doing? And to give some value. And it's something that I like to do every year. Now, both of us provide help to business owners in and around the advice professions. So what I'm going to do is, just before we move on to making that an official thing, and Phil and I talked about it before this episode, is to say, Phil, what are the things that you would focus on it with a business typically when you first engage with them? If we can maybe give them a sense of what process you'd take them through if they decided to work with you. What's the things that you help them do in the first year?
So in the first year, it's really a massive focus on getting really clear about who you want your clients to be, what are the problems you want to solve for them, and how do you want to do business with them. So, it's being, because until you're clear about that, you can't tune the delivery to actually make that happen. And that's essentially building the base. Once you've got a really clear picture, and then you're able to communicate that to potential clients, to prospects, they can see themselves in your client avatars, your value proposition, whatever you want to call it. But being really clear internally about that is super important, and then building the delivery mechanism so that you're just confident that every time that you do something, it's going to happen. It's going to happen efficiently, and it's going to happen, compliantly. We start to move on a little bit into the management space, but it's a reset for the business owners and their key team. And when we coach, we always invite them to bring their key team, not just themselves. I was talking to a business this morning, and he's got a good business, but he hasn't got the team along with him. So the coaching that we do, we say, look, there's no additional cost for you to bring your people along. Bring your people along so that they get it as well, and can help you carry and own the changes that you want to make in the business. That's really the first year. The subsequent years are a bit different to that, but that's really the first year.
And so if someone was to make a time with you, because we've offered to, as we said, open up our calendars to offer an hour chat with us, what would you talk to them about typically during that hour?
Oh, whatever they want to. There's a little bit of data collection we do beforehand, which is really simply a 5-minute survey, just to get them to think about things a little bit beforehand. We like to make our meetings start with a little bit of knowledge about each other. But it's really just trying to, and I think you'd be pretty much the same, as help them to articulate what it is they're actually wanting out of their business, and then just see whether there's a match, in terms of the type of skills that they need to help them to get what they want out of their business. I think for most business owners, Baz, and this is a bit sad, is that they start off with this really clear picture about the business serving them, but they end up serving the business. You need to do a bit of that.
Yeah.
But you need to be really clear about what it is you want out of it, or else you just become so beholden to the business that you actually get your joy stolen and you lose your joy. So regaining your mojo is probably a good start.
That's something I've definitely seen many times myself as well. I like to say that one of my key value propositions is getting your mojo back. Someone once told me that they thought that was a male term, but for me it's been equal, female business owners as much as male business owners. So I'm going to reciprocate and say, in the first year, for me, it's all about understanding who you are and where you're going. What are you trying to accomplish? And the process that you talked about me taking you through is the same thing that I make sure that I do with everyone that I work with. Are you actually delivering or creating the kind of business that is in alignment with you? And how are you going to be more of who you are? Ultimately, that's my purpose in the world, is to help people to really be the best of themselves. And so that's definitely what I concentrate on. How are you articulating yourself? How are you building the business? Are you charging enough? Yes, but are you articulating the value well? And then how are you scaling your connections and your message? Because once you've got those key things right, if you understand how to sequence your messaging, building a business of exactly the right person and having them behave in exactly the right way is easy if you follow the process and the steps. And there are a whole lot of pitfalls that even the best advisors I come across are missing some of those things on. So in that first year, it's all about aligning all of that so that everything kind of just comes together. And so what I would suggest is, hopefully you've enjoyed some of our insight from today. And certainly I would suggest that all of you who are listening, if you can, take the opportunity to grab some time with Phil or myself and take us up on the offer. Now, that doesn't mean that there's an expectation for you to become a client, but it does mean that there's an expectation for you to be open and to listen. The reason I give my time is because I want to actually make a difference for people who are willing to be open about things. And ultimately, to me, it doesn't matter whether you choose to speak to Phil or myself or someone else who's great. And certainly in this instance, if you made a time with me and I identified that I thought that Phil was much better positioned to help you in this stage of your business, I'm just going to suggest that you also then have a chat to Phil. So there's no need to try and take us both up on that opportunity. Pick one of us, you know, make a choice as to who you feel resonates. Make a time with us and we'll be happy to talk to you about where you're at and what you're doing in your business. Otherwise, hope it's been very interesting and informative for you, and certainly thanks for joining us today. And thank you very much, Phil.